Thank you everyone for joining our travel panel where we're going to talk to some experts. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions beforehand. Really great questions. So we're going to get through some of those in a pre-submitted discussion, and then we're going to open it up at the end. And of course, if you have questions during and after, go ahead, put them in the chat. Scott will be managing that, and some of them we'll get to in the moment, some of them we'll save for later, based on how they are. And by the way, I'm Ginger. I'm one of the IDSA Seattle board members. Really happy to moderate this chat. And we'll be recording this. It'll go up on YouTube, but you're here live to ask some questions, have some fun. And also a plug for future IDSA events. We've got the Women in Design conference coming up next week. It's virtual and it's pay what you like, so that's kind of cool. And I will, let's get this started and introduce our panelists. So first, oh, there it goes. Pass it off to Lanna.
Okay, I'm Lanna Liu. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining. I am the product design manager at Alaska Airlines. I lead a team of fantastic designers, writers. Shout out to some of you that are on here. We're focused really on the digital space, but also the physical side of the airport. Yeah, my affiliation with industrial design and IDSA is that my undergrad degree is from ASU in industrial design. I practiced for a little bit in design engineering for aerospace parts, and went into healthcare and did some service design, and that's kind of where I went into the foray of digital design. I moved to Seattle about 5 years ago, and that's when I started at Alaska as a mobile product designer, and I've been there since. So I started leading a team about 2 years ago, and it's awesome.
All right, next we have Ant.
Here we go. Hello, thanks for having me. It's good to see you all. My name's Anthony Harkup. I'm Senior Director of Airline Experience at Teague. I probably don't have to tell you all too much about Teague. I imagine there's a few Teagers or ex-Teagers out there already. In terms of aviation design, so I head up an innovation team, design and innovation team within Teague. And we create new customer crew experiences for the airlines. I know you're probably familiar with Teague having a long relationship with Boeing. And so obviously that's still there and still healthy. But over the last probably 10 years, Teague have been steadily growing a more independent arm that deals directly with airlines and suppliers. And that's my background, and that's the team that I run. So we do all kinds of work, anything from refreshing an airline's brand to customizing interiors, nose to tail, new seat design, labs, pretty much any surface or experience that you can touch or see on an aircraft. That's what we work on customizing that to the airline's brand. So we work directly with the airlines and this interior supply base to bring those to market. So I'm originally an industrial designer by trade. Been doing this for about 16 years, working with the airlines, and I moved to Seattle about 18 months ago. And it's great to be here with you guys today.
Thank you. And we also have Jessica.
Hi everyone. My name is Jess. I'm not currently based in Seattle. I used to live there a few years ago. So thank you so much for inviting me. I'm based in San Francisco, originally from Spain. And my background is in design engineering or industrial design. I worked on this for the past 15 years, and I had the pleasure to work with some amazing teams like up north in Seattle with Teague, or at IDEO down in Palo Alto. I always been a very hands-on designer, and I like to act as the connective tissue between the ID and the shop. So more recently, I had the chance to get introduced to the exciting and nimble startup world in the Bay, and I work with NEO developing some electric and self-driving cars. But over a year ago, I decided to do something different, and I became an independent designer. And that's when I started working with Aero, who hired me to design the experience of this new type of airline from the ground up. So that's what I've been leading since a year ago.
Awesome. So without further ado, many questions came in. I hope we're going to cover them all. So I'm going to start with talking about where the industry, the travel industry, was at before everything started to lock down and immediately shift gears. And I think, Anthony, you had some thoughts to contribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, I know from a commercial standpoint, or like a global fleet standpoint, it's been since, I mean, I joined the industry in 2005, early 2005, and it was just recovering then from 9/11. And it's been on a fairly consistent upward trajectory from that point. It's been growing something like 7 or 8% a year from that point. And you know, so basically new aircraft build rate outstripping retirement. So the global fleet going up and up. So just it's something like where we got to pre-COVID, aircraft build rates were somewhere around 120 a month. That's just like the narrow bodies. You know, so there's a lot of work out there from a design standpoint, pretty steady flow of customization work. And, you know, all being driven by new aircraft purchases, but then back driving into a lot of the retrofit market as well. So it was quite a healthy, buoyant design market. A lot of that customization was around twin aisle, long range aircraft used largely for international travel. And that's where the interior design efforts are often all encompassing, nose to tail, every touch point, every human interface. And usually the lay flat business class seating products are at the focus of that design effort. I think, you know, the brakes now being slammed on and business class or business travel being affected so heavily, and wide bodies not flying anymore, and marketing departments, you know, reducing. The landscape it hasn't stopped moving yet, but it's definitely moving in the other direction.
Cool. So you kind of touched on the changing terrain of travel and what's not flying, what's still flying. And in addition to the restrictions, people's perception towards travel is changing. And everyone, I think, is very keen on hearing how we're going to instill confidence in them and get them traveling again. So I think first I'd like to open that up to Jessica.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. I think that trust is something that airlines have been working, becoming trustworthy since a long time ago, right? Like developing lots of loyalty programs and so on. The difference is that I feel like right now, this factor is really paramount to really ensure that their business is running and that customers keep coming back, right? So I feel like airlines cannot be or present themselves as victims despite their own suffering, but instead they should help everyone impacted. Airlines need to shine when the spotlight is on them right now. It's all the attention, it's right on them. So I had kind of drafted four tips for them to really like get the trust from the travelers. And the number one will be that they could introduce policies that work for customers and not just for their own benefit. So This way, they will build their affinity with their travelers. And like, for instance, they could have the no changing fee policy and encourage travelers to keep booking flights with no fear. The second thing will be to not inform, but just reassure. I feel like we saw some images or some videos from Qatar Airlines that was showing a video of their staff doing a full deep clean into their aircraft with full bodysuits and everything. And that's something very reassuring. At Aero, we also did something interesting, which was we noticed that a lot of people were bringing their own disinfectant kits and so on, and they will have the risk on messing up the cabin. And so what we did was to instead of prescribe or forbid what they should not do, we provided a kind of what we call a ritual kit for travelers to wipe down their touch points and beginning the journey in a more pleasant way. So that will be the second. The third one will be to really walk the talk. So in times of really extra awareness, airlines should ensure that they deliver their promises. They cannot say, yes, we are cleaning after every single flight. And then if someone finds something dirty, then they will be under scrutiny for sure. And then the fourth one will be leading by example. So a number of airlines are now cutting down to their capacity. And we saw, on the other hand, different airlines like Air New Zealand or Qantas as well, their own CEOs got a voluntary pay cut and introduce different salary freezes to their senior management. So leading by example and really ensuring that the people who make the experience of flying better, they're still there.
Okay, and then I also think we wanted to get, we actually want everyone to comment on this. So Lanna, you're next.
Yeah. As far as users' perception, I feel like, I guess in the sentiment of travel, I feel like the main thing was it used to be exciting, or if it was a business traveler, maybe it's routine. And so today it's far from exciting if you're going on a vacation or something, or a routine for business. So now it's really like, should I even travel to begin with? And I think that's a lot of the questions that travelers are asking themselves, like, is this the right thing to do? Is this what I want to do? And I feel like as an airline, we're trying to instill the confidence that, you can travel. We're doing all the things within our control to make it a safe experience for you. Alaska actually has done this campaign called Next Level Care, where we are, to Jessica's point, those 4 points, doing a lot of that, and changing our policies and procedures, and having things like a health agreement, and making sure people are wearing masks, and really enforcing that. I think that's the other point that you were making as well, is that it's not enough to just say you have to wear a mask, but then people get on the plane and then they're not actually doing it. And I think we've come up with some clever ways of enforcing that. We have a policy, it's called the yellow card. And so it's empowering our agents to be able to yellow card our passengers and travelers if they're not actually following what you're agreeing to in the health agreement. And so, doing those things is helping with instilling that confidence, and also, minimizing those touch points that you have throughout your day of travel experience, whether that's through self-service or a contactless kiosk where you don't have to touch the screen. We released a scan and tag experience this week, actually, and that's been widely well received. And then the other thing is, our team has done a lot of work in actually communicating out what we're doing. So it's not enough to just put those things in place and make those changes if we're not communicating to our guests, and they're coming to our site or seeing it in any marketing or anything, not knowing what we're doing. So I feel like a lot of that has been making sure to communicate that we have those safety protocols and changes that were being made.
And Anthony, did you have something to add?
Yeah, firstly, sympathy with Lana's situation. You know, people don't appreciate just the scale of an airline, you know, and like it's very easy to come up with an idea or a process or a demand or something, but you know, like both Jessica and Lana have pointed out, consistency is so important in trust. Someone's only got to see that you've slipped up once and they don't trust you anymore. So you have to be careful what you promise, but you have to promise something and you've got to deliver something. And I mean, just take, for example, 1,000 flights a day, let's say. I think that's what you were pre-COVID, wasn't it, Lana? Something along those lines. But, you know, if you take that 200 people per flight, you've got 20,000 passenger movements to ensure, you know, a credible experience for every single day, you know, and that's kind of an impossible task. So, yeah, my heart goes out to you really in this particular situation, because there's no getting it right. It's just degrees of getting it wrong. And, you know, so people have become conditioned to assess every environment now for either potential respiratory infection risk or surface transmission risk. Just generally, people are just so much more aware how easily diseases spread. And consciously or subconsciously, they're now risk assessing every environment and definitely associating risk with densely populated environments. So, you know, that's really shined a light on aviation because, well, first of all, in an aircraft, you've got a large volume of people in a very small space, and that's just how life is. You can't get around that. And then airports, you've got a huge amount of people going through them, really high footfall and frequency. So people's expectations on cleanliness and sanitation is going to be disproportionately high in the short term, but even in the long term, it's going to remain now, we think, an area of passenger focus. So, you know, if we want to encourage people back to the skies, you use the word trust, and that's exactly right. It's how do you instill trust in people now? And, you know, you need to take whatever changes are necessary to keep people safe from the risk of infection. But also they need to see that something's changed. It needs to be made visible and make it part of that, a memorable part of that flying experience, you know, communicate everything. Yeah, and some airlines are doing that really well. Alaska is a great example, like your next level care, you know, you're creating touchless check-in services, you know, a lot of visibility online with your cleaning processes and, you know, publicizing the ongoing research you're doing with, like board certified specialists in infectious diseases, all that kind of stuff. It means so much to people that are traveling at the moment, because whether you feel it or not, there are actually a bracket of people that are petrified of travel and see it as a necessary evil. So, you know, that's it's a good opportunity to make a connection with those people, isn't it?
So another question is coming in more on the internal side of designing. Where are we adding value? How are we showing that we've added value, and get that buy-in from the leadership at our companies to continue doing what we're doing? I think I first wanted to hear from Lana about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, how and where. So I feel like design, of course, we're a group of a lot of designers here, obviously. So I think we think of ourselves often as like, oh, we're the problem solvers. We can, and I like to think about it as everyone's a problem solver. You've probably all heard that a lot of times. But what I have seen the value in is that we follow and go through the human-centered design approach, and we really think about people and how they're experiencing things, and, you know, the doing, feeling, thinking aspects of it, and bringing that to, at least like for us at Alaska, what I love seeing is that human-centered design approach and our experience design and research team bringing that to the company and bringing that to others and expanding that out so that we can apply that to our experiences and our products. And I think we're most successful when we're bringing others together and collaborating more. And so I think as far as that's the biggest value. And then as far as buy-in from leadership, it's really about showing what you can do. And I think by bringing those people and other groups together and showing your successes, I mean, it continues to build on. And so I think you have to kind of prove that there's, you know, through data and through the outcomes, that this is something that you can bring to the table. And through that, you know, that's going to offer that continued buy-in from leadership, and you just got to keep on doing it.
Totally. I'll have you add on to that, Anthony?
Yeah. I mean, design itself is, I think, obviously is and will play a huge role. I think initially, though, design thinking was probably the first tool we used in our toolbox for our customers. I mean, when the pandemics kind of come in a few kind of stages of acceptance. And I think that the first one, when COVID kind of stopped the world and people realized what was actually going on, so every department in every company became either generators of ideas or receivers of ideas, or, you know, got this new potion from this place that's going to cure COVID on the aircraft, and everyone's diving into these ideas and burning a ton of resource. And I think fundamentally, our customers across the board, whether it was in digital, product design, mobility, they wanted us to help them understand the problem, or at least some kind of framework that would enable them to understand whether or not, how do they measure their solutions and appropriately apply them in different areas. And it's, what design's classically good for is understanding human-centered problems, and that's what this is. Like trust, that's a really human. It's a uniquely human value, and there's certain values people need to see in order to create trust, and I think that's really how we started to help companies really to orient what they were doing. What are those values that we need? And it was like the 4 C's of trust: competence, commitment, compassion, and communication. I think it was something like, but it basically boils down to actually make people safe and then communicate that you're making them safe and care about them. And it was trying to then break that down into different buckets and help them to organize, have we got enough of all of these different kinds of solutions, before we even start looking at solutions. So the real value, and that, I think even in the second wave, where we're trying to help companies get more focus around the future, because obviously your strategy's just gone down the drain, because the future, what you thought the future was going to be, is not there anymore. It's going to be something different. So how do you now align your strategic plan and all your product development on board if you don't know what you're aiming for anymore? So that's almost been like the second value we've found in design thinking exercises, is really trying to understand from all the different trends, what's going on in the marketplace, what's the commercial landscape. We're diving in with that and journey maps and really trying to help our customers build a vision of what the future is highly likely to be a very small amount of certain outcomes for the travel industry. And out of that, there's some fairly solid strategy you can hang your hat on. So I think lastly then, what we're putting a lot of that into action now within Teague. We're investing in some of our own solutions to help airlines. We know we need to actually do some design work and not ask to be paid for it if we want to actually contribute and help. So that's kind of what we're doing, trying to help with airborne transmission and surface transmission with some ideas we can actually bring to the airlines and say, what do you think about this? So certainly I think design is pivotal now. It's going to continue to be pivotal as we try and figure out and navigate our way through all this.
Definitely. Right. Okay. So obviously health and safety initiatives are quite expanded, and they're unlike anything we've ever seen before. And there's some wondering if that's actually conflicting with other things that we design for. Is it adding new challenges and forcing some compromises? And I think first we're going to hear from Jessica.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think before, kind of like this question was a little tricky for me to wrap my head around, but before any expansion, I think that will be actually, we are witnessing a noticeable economical contraction, right? So I think we will develop more sustainable ways of traveling. I don't think that we will be able to cross Europe for 25 euros anymore. I don't think that is sustainable, and it wasn't sustainable before. And now I think that type of tourism or that type of airline will fade. Yeah, leaving us with another expansion. But before that, we are going to have a long period of contraction.
Okay. So changes to, again, internal processes, R&D, and what people are doing inside as designers. What's different? What stays the same? I think first we're going to hear from Lanna.
I'd say it's development affected. It's impacted at least Alaska, and I'm sure and pretty much any industry and company quite a bit in that it hit us fast and quickly, and we didn't know what we were expect really. And so from the development side of things, I feel like, you might lay out a roadmap or, a plan of what you're going to work on as a company, an industry for a certain amount of time, and this is turning itself on its head. So a lot of it was pivoting, and a lot of it was, we're not going to do this anymore. And so I bet there's pretty much plenty of people in this room that we're working on something, and that's no longer what you're working on. It's something different. So I feel like that was a huge impact. And then, as far as the design process being different, I think that we at least typically stick to our design process. And I think that design process is important and kind of key to the successes of what we were talking about, of how it's going to add a lot of value. I'd say that we're working differently in that we're working faster and having to adapt and adjust to what's happening. So I think we no longer can take for granted what we knew before. And so we're making a lot of best guesses and making some assumptions about what we're going to do or what we think people's behaviors or the future is going to be. And cross your fingers that is the case, but you never know. So, and then as far as the research and development side of things, I think, that's part of it, is you put something out there and you're throwing your dart and see how it goes. And data and research is really what's going to help guide us to make more informed decisions, whatever we can gather and garner from that. And so I think that's really critical right now, where we don't have a lot of room for error. There's really not. So using data and research and doing research as much as we can to help inform and make sure that what we're doing we can quickly adjust and learn and adapt to what we're putting out there, and making sure it's working for our travelers and guests.
I think, Ant, you're going to add to that?
Yeah, I'm actually quite interested, Lana, about how with digital, are you finding that you're able to iterate more with digital and just show change and show communication?
I'd say yes, for sure. I think we're iterating, we're making changes so quickly in our policies and procedures, and a lot of that is coming out through digital experiences or changes in self-service and stuff. And so while we may have had we work in an agile process, and methodology. It's just now we're we might have wanted to do a little bit more here and there, but now we're moving fast, and it's like, let's monitor that, have the analytics in place. So kind of, and that's the typical process, but now we're like, we don't maybe have as much time to monitor things, like where you might want to like see what the trends are for like a couple months or something. And now like, okay, like let's see what that is, and tracking over time a little bit. It's a little tighter time frame. And then just like, I think we're hearing from guests and getting feedback and making sure that those mechanisms are in place. And it's even more critical right now. And so that's been a big part of that process, like the changes a little bit of just moving at a different pace and keeping an open ear at a much, and it should be, it's important regardless, but I think we're doing it a lot more.
I would like to ask a question in between, because I feel like out of context in a later stage, that will be really hard. But how do you decide what to react to? What is a change that is permanent, and what is just due to like the current, state of mind, or just the current situation? Like a lot of these things, hopefully, I really hope so, will go away again. So how do you where do you say like, okay, we need to do something, and we need to do something like long term? How do you draw a line, and how do you decide on these things?
I think there are some things, and I don't want to make too much answer, but if others want to speak, I have answers as well. But like, I think for some things, it's that we knew, we've always known in some ways, like, oh, there's plenty of people that don't really want to interact with our agents. They want to do self-service. And so like, maybe that's a good thing too. We've known this for a while, and these are kind of the tools or things that we wanted to do and should be doing. So like, let's invest in that. Or do people really actually want to touch things that other people have been touching? I don't think, even in a COVID world, like, yeah, we're really, really conscious of not touching things, or like we want antimicrobial things, and that's probably been something that's existed before. It did exist before COVID. So that has helped, where you can kind of refine things, and like, these are things that we've wanted to do or known have been pain points or opportunity areas that existed before. So like, those are good ones. And then the other ones maybe that are more temporal, like temporary, then, do things that are like, that's kind of also where we're doing things quicker, and maybe responding to them, maybe not as digital, and maybe it's something that lives like in print, or, in marketing, and like in our advertisements or something like that.
Yeah, that's really very good point, because this part of the workshop we put together more recently with some suppliers and airlines. In fact, I don't know if you know Chris De La Rosa, but he's from Alaska, and he joined our workshop on this one. But it was about future casting, and it was exactly that question, Thomas. It was, how do we know we're not just investing in a bunch of stuff that is knee-jerk reaction, and it's going to be here today and gone tomorrow? And Ed Bastian actually gave a really good speech from Delta, and he talked about how the pandemic is bringing our future forward. And the context that he used that in was, it would have taken us 5 years to get to the point of fleet efficiency that we've had 5 months to execute recently. We've got rid of all of our old aircraft, that are not fuel efficient, and we've now skinned that down to the newest, most environmentally friendly, maintainable fleet. But that's just one aspect at looking at the fleet. I mean, if you think about the touchless experience, with all the touchless technology and biometrics, that was always coming our way. When you look at all of the kind of utopian view of wafting through an airport without having to touch anything, and you just walk through and it recognizes you. That's happening. People are going to want to now use screen mirroring. They don't want to touch an IFE handset or an IFE screen anymore. They want to use their phone. This is all going to happen. We will have the touch experience, and it's just going to come quicker now out of demand. So, I think that was one exercise, was looking at, these technologies are now driving us towards. and what people have always wanted. And to check on that, we went back through probably 10 years of data of passenger journeys. So what we do is map the journey from, often from curb to cabin, but we took that down to just a cabin level for this one exercise. And we said, what are all the pain points at boarding, taxi takeoff and landing, mealtime, lavatory, rest, work? What was there before? What people always wanted, and then we kind of matched that over, if you like, the COVID pain points that we got. And you start to get a feeling for what things is COVID going to accelerate the resolution of. And, again, a bit of common sense in there as well. And you get to some design briefs pretty quick.
Sorry, just trying to
screen
sharing.
Thanks for answering that, and sorry for interrupting, but I felt like that was one of these things where hard to get your head around. I was just afraid as a designer, one day they're gonna ask me to design some a touchless tactile experience or something like that.
That's perfect. Perfect segue into this, actually, talking about looking at what could have been done differently at the beginning of the response to the pandemic, but what we're keeping for next time. And I think you guys were kind of getting into that a little bit. If I could hear from Anthony again first.
Yeah, I like this question because, it acknowledges the next pandemic. I think that is coming. Viruses aren't going anywhere, and they're only going to get worse, and population is expanding. So I think it's wise to think this is going to happen again, and can we afford to be hit as hard a second time? I'm not sure we could have done anything differently, but I think the response to the next pandemic will be different. And I think for all the reasons we've talked about, we're now moving in a direction. I think there's certain behaviors now that have been hardwired different. And I think if you look at how pretty much every aviation brand positioned themselves, it was pretty much the two fundamental things were comfort and safety. That was pretty much whatever you were shooting for, you had to cover comfort and safety, and they all fitted into those two buckets one way or another. What's happened that's really, really significant is another one has now bubbled up to the surface as equally important. And I think it's a way brands are now going to start to have to define themselves. It's going to become a new brand promise. And I think that is going to help to future-proof us, because it's now a new arms race, to fold that in and really respond to this new anxiety that people have. And that's going to be a hangover that's going to last for a little while, I would have thought. Different strains of COVID that are coming out, and all of the media attention is getting at the moment, specifically new studies that are being done showing how the virus is spread on aircraft, and they've now got the actual aircraft and the row numbers, and it's like, good God, all this new negative attention that we don't need. But I think it is going to be a catalyst for some pretty positive change, and because actually, looking forward, we do actually need to combat this, and if that's what it does, then I think that's a good thing. And we're certainly looking at ways, like we've come up with something called Air Shield, which is something that goes over the gaspers above the air vents above each passenger's head, and it turns that jet into air curtains that separate the passengers, so that you don't get respiratory droplets going from passenger to passenger. But just think about it, that potential's always been there. It's just sat above the head of every single person. That's quite a noble change of use, that now for moving forward, the pandemic might well force that principle to create a much cleaner cabin, so people aren't going to catch the common cold anymore when they get on an aircraft. And if you think now how it's going to force differences in the way that seats are going to be designed, You know, their seats are now going to be so that you can wipe them clean easily. They'll be made from materials that can withstand all the chemicals. There's not going to be loads of little creases and stitch lines so that they're going to catch dirt. They'll be lighter in color so that people can see that it's clean. It will start to maybe borrow some principles from the healthcare industry. And, you know, I think all of these things, and even some crew being trained in like anxiety management. Now, there's been a lot of cross-pollination between the healthcare industry and aviation. They're all really positive things. That it's a good reason. It's a terrible reason that they've happened, but I think it's going to take us to a much brighter future once we're through this awful transition. You know, I think it will come stronger after.
I love that positivity on this question that is a little bit grim. Lanna, did you have anything to add to it?
Yeah, it's really, I think I mentioned just in the previous question of like knowing some of those pain points and opportunities that already existed within like the travel experience that we could. So I feel like less catch up would have been great and would be great. And not just for like the travel industry, I think in general for the world, I feel like we were less prepared than we could have been for a pandemic. And so really thinking and making sure that we're not keeping with the status quo just because it's comfortable, just because it's you know, I think we have this tendency like to think about things of, oh, you know, this works, it's good enough, it's what everyone else is doing, so that's all we need to do. Or, you know, this is how we've always done it. So I think to do it differently, I feel like I push or would love to see more of the pushing of why we do it the way that we do it, and can we do something different, can we do it better, and I think that might help with that response to the next pandemic, because if we're continuously pushing ourselves in a more forward direction, I mean, you know, we're never going to be prepared for anything because you never know what's going to happen, but maybe having those muscles in place and like those mechanisms in place to be able to do that will be greatly beneficial.
Cool.
I will add also one more thing to this, because when I read the next pandemic, it seems like we didn't go through this before, but we actually did. So if we look into architecture and see how Le Corbusier solved all those problems with the tuberculosis, we could maybe learn something from that. And of course, it was a huge shift, right? To have modern architecture and open spaces inside buildings. So maybe perhaps as an inspiration for the next pandemic or for the current pandemic, to learn from the past, I think will be very, very important.
That's true. We lived through it before. Can live through it again.
Just forgot about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've covered a little bit about what's going to go back to what it was or what's not. I think people were really curious about the specific flight experiences, and if they're going to be what they were, kind of getting some hints that maybe they're not. But first, can we have Jessica kind of respond to this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. Yeah, I think that so from the standpoint of Aero, for instance, what we are doing here is to not include any classes, but just to have a small cabin of 16 passenger, right? So bringing back that joy of travel that will that is reminiscent to the golden age. So when we used to dress up because traveling was an event, and now we go almost in pajamas to fly. But yeah, and I think that's something that it's gonna evolve, right? The scale on which we fly, maybe something a little bit more human, something a little bit more reduced to something smaller. Yeah, that's what I had to add.
I think next I wanted to hear from Lanna about this.
I had to mute myself, the garage, so good. So yeah, as far as the travel experience returning, I don't think that it's going to return to, and that's my take, is to what it was, just because I don't think anything really was. I think we have a new normal, or like once this is, it'll be a new normal. So, you know, all the things that we're doing right now and the changes, I feel like it'll be like at least probably a year of these changed behaviors and changed routines that we've now adapted and adopted. And that's kind of what we're accustomed to. And like the technologies and the experiences that we have now, I don't think we're not going to forget that. Or those are still going to live in the world. So I think in some ways, I think the travel experience will be improved because like I mentioned, we're making some of those changes that were long overdue. And then ideal in a COVID and non-COVID world. It's hard to say. I think that it's actually, and Susan's on this call, she posted something the other day about an article that Huge put out on their website. It's about post-isolation personas. And I found that really fascinating because I think we should keep in mind what those, like people are changing and those personas are going to be, we need to keep those in mind. So I feel like designing for the COVID and non-COVID world, we're gonna have to do that with both. And then, you know, just, I think continuing to evolve and change for this non-COVID world, whatever that new normal is. We'll just see what happens.
Yeah. One more thing that I will add to this question is that I will answer the question with another question. So the world didn't become the same after 9/11, right? So I think it should be comparable to what is currently happening. And there will be new rituals happening at airports, same way we didn't used to remove our shoes or check how many centiliters we had on our carry-on and so on. So I think those routines will be implemented, and yeah, and then maybe looking back, we will realize, you know, we will have some sense of nostalgic feelings for what it was before, but it will be just the new normal.
Yeah, I'm seeing as part of that. You remember how anyone shouting a bomb after 9/11, that would be almost an arrestable offence post 9/11 to do something silly like that. I'm seeing that now, sneezing without putting your hand over your mouth post COVID, you're probably going to have like a similar effect, I would have thought, on you know, how you might get treated.
Yeah. I may be disclosing my age by saying that I remember flying and people smoking while flying.
Yeah.
So, but you know, that's something that we used to do, and that now it seems crazy, right? So.
Yeah.
Also, thank you, Suzanne, for that link in the chat. If you want to peep that article about the new personas.
Super interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Wanted to ask on behalf of attendees, if they're not in the travel industry, they come from other industries, what can they learn and adapt from travel to their own products and users? I'm going to start it with Lanna.
You know, we actually, there's probably plenty of things. I think in some ways, I've been looking at it in the sense of observing what other industries are doing as well. So, you know, we can all learn from each other is really the thing that I've been taking away, is like, I think we've gone on, I know Lindsay, like field trips of seeing like what other things are out there and how are other people solving for some of these touchless experiences, or, you know, those connections and stuff. So I find that to be like, just absorb and kind of see what's going on. And the other thing is not necessarily as what is being done, but how companies and industries are going about it. So I think it kind of goes back to the trust part of things, where you can say that you're doing things, or you say that you have this in your product and this is what you're doing for your users, but you're not maybe enforcing that, or actually like when push comes to shove, it's not how, it doesn't actually work that way. And so keeping in mind how that companies are going about that, and adapting that to your products and users as well.
The flip side of that, there's mention of a lot of collaboration to make the new solutions. What are the collaborations that you want to see happen to best serve travelers? I think first we want to hear from Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, am I muted or am I? No.
You're good.
Yeah, I think I touched on it briefly. I think one of the, we noticed just huge similarities between, organizationally, between healthcare and airlines. I mean, if you think of an airport with aircraft and a hospital, and then the large hospital, you've got like, in terms of the amount of staff comparative to the amount of people going through the building, it is similar proportions. Then the kinds of staff that you have, whether it's kind of surgeons, doctors, or nurses, is very similar kind of breakdown to pilots, flight crew, and flight attendants. And then, you've got it's a very highly certified environment where you've got, it's life or death situation, and in terms of bringing in then new procedures when you're dealing with such vast quantities of people 24/7, you've got a lot of things that you could borrow from the healthcare industry, and I think now if you look at the way the healthcare industry deal with not touching surfaces when they don't need to, making the colors of the inside of the building and certain surfaces much lighter so that you can see whether or not something is clean, and touched before on like anxiety management that they teach nurses to deal with children or really nervous people when they're going in for operations. Crew can learn that now in terms of dealing with very, very anxious flyers. And we started to make some connections there with some airlines and people in the healthcare industry to get them collaborating together. So that was one big area that we see. There's a lot more. There's a lot more help that could be gleaned from that parallel industry study, if you like. We'd see that moving forward as offering quite a lot of insight as to how airports, airlines, and aircraft, might influence interiors and processes. But
Jessica, I think you had some stuff to add to this one.
Yeah, I will think about, from the top of my head, 3 to 4 different industries. Of course, pharma or like medical industry, as Anthony was mentioning. I would say the tech industry for sure, like developing contactless solutions, like what you last day, Herman, you were sharing on LinkedIn, right? What Amazon one did. That is a fantastic product, and I could envision that being part of the boarding experience. Then the second one will be packaging. I will think about packaging companies because lots of airlines cut down their meal services because of COVID. But I would love to see this turning into a positive situation where actually companies come up with tableware that is more sustainable. So it's just one use only, but at the same time, it can be completely recyclable. So I think using this moment as using the momentum of this moment to push for more innovation, I think is key. So it's a very broad answer, but I think there's so much to be done across different areas that the airline industry touches. And then materials, of course, materials that will be developed. I imagine that there's all these leathers that come that are already naturally antibacterial. So having those kind of materials that don't compromise airworthiness and that are ready to go, yeah, I think that would be fantastic.
I would love that. I would love a revamp of the in-flight meal.
Yes, exactly. About time.
So looking 5 to 10 years out and beyond, what opportunities have been presented to the travel industry? I think a lot of this panel has actually been really positive about maybe some of the negative circumstance, but maybe you guys can speak a little bit more to that. Let's start with Anthony.
There's a couple of pretty big changes that we see coming. And just in terms of what's happened at the moment, there's pretty significant is the international travel and wide bodies, just the amount of grounded big birds that there are, and there's no international travel really happening at the moment, or very, very little. It's put certain airlines at a huge commercial disadvantage. The airlines that are positioned, and it's largely China and America that have the largest domestic activity, or short haul, if you like, single aisle activity going on. And, you know, that's getting up to 70% of what it was pre-COVID at the moment. So the airlines and it's mostly leisure travel, because business travel at the moment, for a number of reasons, people, A, they can communicate digitally. B, there's a lot of companies don't want to get into the whole liability of one of their staff contracting COVID because they were asked to go on a business trip. There's so many reasons. That's just kind of locked down and it's almost dead. Now what we're seeing is a lot of airlines now that were traditionally quite focused on business class, long haul business class, are focusing their attentions with their narrow body fleets to the leisure market and doing this big pivot. And now everybody's kind of chasing that same dime at the moment. But obviously the airlines that are already well equipped and set up for leisure travel have been doing very well and are continuing to do better. So there's going to be a proliferation of LCCs. I think as well, the larger tier 1 airlines in the world that have maybe a bigger overhead with those wider, larger aircraft, they're really struggling at the moment. So yeah, the future looks like, at least over the next year, that there's going to be significant growth in the LCC narrow body market, and also the growth in point-to-point travel. The hub and spoke model, you know, commercially it's not good and people don't like it. And also it's less hygienic. When you think of all the people going through major hubs, I think generally people are going to prefer to do a point-to-point model now. So, you know, I think what you're going to see the whole landscape change. I'm fairly convinced of that. And I think what you're going to see then is much less wide body aircraft in the sky, and where possible, you know, the long range narrow bodies are going to take up the maximum routes they can, and aircraft are going to get developed to a narrow body long range aircraft. So I think what you're going to see is, and I think it'll be a good thing again, like, because domestic travel is going to take on higher status with airlines. That's going to be the new battleground for interiors providers and airlines, is to provide that really good, like experience for families and leisure travelers now. And so I think you're going to see that reflected in products, and the customization that you used to see in wide body aircraft, you're going to start to see that more in narrow body aircraft. So I think you're going to see a lot more special premium, smaller aircraft with more options for the different demographics that fly for leisure travel.
Very cool. And next, can I hear from Lanna about that?
5 to 10 years, it's a decent ways, but in a really neat way to think about. Actually, Jessica, I'm glad you brought up sustainability, because I feel like that is going to be an opportunity presented to the travel industry for sure. It's not something that we are, I mean, with the pandemic going on, it's not something that's top of mind really per se, but I think like there are ways like we can rethink about the in-flight experience and packaging in that way and stuff. But I feel like one thing that comes to mind for me is the global warming and crisis there. And so, you know, we might run into a similar situation where like, can we in the future, like, are we even going to be able to continue flying the way that we do? And maybe it's reduced right now, but like if we went back to the trajectory that we were at before, we may run into some issues there. So I feel like sustainability, I think not only is that for a business, but also something that is going to appeal to travelers and make it more motivating to do it. And like I work for an airline, and that's one of the things that kind of does make me turn my head a little bit when I think about how much fuel is involved with every flight that occurs. So I'm really hoping that airlines and the travel industry in general can tackle that one and think a little bit more on that front. And then the other one is, for me, is in thinking about accessibility. And if you can have a more like seamless experience when you're navigating through the airport, or we have these technologies in place and things are just a little bit, they're going to be different. I mean, in 5 to 10 years, maybe that air travel that might have been, or travel in general, that might have been difficult for some, may not be as difficult. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can work towards something to work for everyone.
Very cool. And Jessica, do you have something to add?
Yeah, not much to add. You guys covered pretty much all the points. I guess it's almost like what my dream job would be. That would be working for an electric aircraft company or electric airline that really cares about those aspects. So completely sustainable and green.
That's the dream.
Hey Ginger, can I add something? I thought, Anthony, you said something really amazing in that, like, there's a huge projection for twin aisle aircrafts, and just wanted to give the audience a bit more perspective where twin aisle aircrafts have bigger engines, so they in the past could travel a lot farther. They could go across the continents. But what's amazing about the engine and design development of the aviation industry is that the single aircrafts, including the 737 MAX, is it can now travel to about just under 4,000 miles, which, for example, Seattle to Tokyo is almost 5,000. So the crazy development of these from a sustainability standpoint is you don't need a huge aircraft to carry. You can take a small aircraft and take them across the water, and I think that's the big development in the past 2 decades, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there was a huge disruption about to happen where before COVID kind of knocked it on the head. But prior to me being at T, the last job I did was for JetBlue, and working on their premium new version of their premium lay flat seat, and they bought us some long range A321 Neos, and they just put out a press release talking about how they were going to do the flight from New York to the UK. And now, if you book a seat in Mint business class, it's a lay flat product, and it feels great in a narrow body aircraft because it feels like a private jet. It's just really exclusive. You don't have that, you know, the wider room lounge kind of feel. It's much more exclusive. But they're so much cheaper. If you do like over here, if you get a coast to coast flight that's, I don't know, 6 hours, you're looking at something like two grand. Whereas if you do that same distance, but you do it from London to New York, it'll cost you 7 grand at pounds with BA. So they could do the same distance for like a third of the price. I don't know what price they were going to pitch it at, but you know, I can imagine that was going to be a low cost premium business class experience in actually a really nice environment, you know, like a brand new narrow body. That I see as something that's going to disrupt the market, because I think it's going to bring costs down. I think the filter down effect is that, like I was saying before, I think it's going to have a positive effect on lower fares, potentially, the amount of funds that is going to go into narrow body aircraft now. Because the way that they're bought and customized at the moment is you buy one and then you get very, very little choice with what you do with that interior, other than what seat you put in and what dress cover you put on. And it's a different mindset with wide bodies. I think once the focus becomes narrow body, I think we're going to see that's going to blossom. I think we might see what we've always wanted, which is revolution in economy. That's what I'm praying for. That opportunity to land on my doorstep one day.
So I think I had a question related to the proliferation and maybe right now the limitation of smaller aircraft flights and what's supposed to be, I guess, leisure flying, and the feeling that some travelers have of guilt when they go somewhere, especially maybe if they're just trying to take a vacation. Can you guys speak a little bit to if what we're going to do now is not travel for work, should travelers have that guilt? Do they have something to feel guilty about?
I think that I'll jump in. I say for business travel, we've seen definitely that's impacted us a lot, because so much of our revenue was from business travelers, and some of our repeat customers are those business travelers. And so with COVID, and people are no one's traveling, and businesses are especially like, no, that's not something we're doing, and really being tight with that, which is a good thing for the public safety. But, you know, as we get back to this new normal and things, like, I feel like that's also a shift in behaviors as well, where maybe what was previously done, where we had, you know, where people were flying to go to vendors and see, you know, manufacturers or something, or sales and business meetings, they don't need to do that anymore. But I don't think that, as far as the guilt as it goes, I think it's really up to what people are feeling comfortable with, and like, we are instilling confidence in doing what we can. And I think that it goes back to those post-isolation personas as well. Like, there will be people that, you know, are itching to travel because, you know, for whatever reason, they're just driven by that, and they need that. So I think kind of keeping in mind the safety aspects of things and following, you know, guidelines, and we're doing what we can. So I mean, as far as from a company, I'm saying, like, yes, everyone should feel free to travel, but I think it's really up to everyone's discretion. But I think that the guilt part is an interesting thought. I've struggled a little bit with that myself.
Looks like we had a quick question in the chat. Does the NMMA fall into the smaller aircraft category? And I think that's related to what you were talking about, Anthony.
Oh, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to answer that. I might hold off if I talk about that. I decline to answer that. I'm not too highly likely, is what I would say.
It's in the news, so I was just curious.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, It's highly likely.
All right, looks like we have a question here from Sarah. If someone is declared too sick to fly, do airlines have the authority to prevent those people from boarding? What's done with those people? How are they compensated? Do we need quarantine lounges or hotels or even medical wings in the airport?
That is something that I touched on this briefly, and I didn't get into detail of what this was, but part of our Next Level campaign, Next Level Care campaign, and it's just in general about our policies and procedures, and I think most of the airlines are following this, is that we have a health agreement that is part of the check-in process. And I know that, check-in is typically 24 hours, but I mean that kind of if you have any symptoms, and you're kind of agreeing to whether you have any symptoms, whether you've been exposed, like anything like that, if you are sick, then you are going to opt out of flying, and that we've provided options for, it's kind of that worry-free thing where if that happens, it's okay, and we will refund your flight. And to kind of encourage that to be like, don't be sick and fly. Like, you can get your money back, or you can rebook this, and these are your options for that. And then as far as the quarantine thing, it's interesting because actually, I think Hawaii today announced that they were going to open back up soon. And so they're doing something in place. And I know I've seen other companies, they're starting to do test kits for passengers, so to be able to do that in advance. So that'll be something like with Hawaii opening up, they're not doing the quarantine that they had done in the past, and so you're proving that you have a negative test result before flying. So I mean, there's a lot that's being done, and I think those are great examples where we're like, oh, let's put something in place, or like what can we do to kind of still have travel live on and continue, but to give some of that peace of mind.
Is that a middle step in the full evolution of what that becomes? Is there a more idealized process of that?
I mean, I think right now, as far as like a health agreement, it's hard from an airline. I think those things are in place, and like we kind of have to trust our guests in some ways to make the right decisions. And I don't think we're at a point where like I don't think it's going to be enforced airline by airline, and I think we have to probably, a lot of it will come from like a government body if at some point, if that was to evolve and change. Or I know there's talk about contact tracing, and that the CDC's been mentioning before, but then who knows whether it actually is going to happen. But yeah.
Recently I had to fly internationally back to Europe, and so we had a PCR done with 48 hours prior to flying. No one asked for it. But we did it. And then also once you land in Europe, we had a QR code for contact tracing too. So there's certain measures that are being, they're taking, I mean, depending on the airline, they're moving forward to one extreme or the other, or they're more agile implementing those changes. I think it's all a little bit too fresh, and yeah. Mm-hmm.
The flexibility in the ticketing, I think used to be one of the biggest heartburns of flying, perhaps. Is that something that we're going to see stick around when it's not needed as much as it is now?
Yeah, I know that we've indefinitely removed our change and cancel fees. So that's something it's offering a lot of flexibility and peace of mind to people. Like, it's like, because we want to encourage people at this point that they can purchase flights and go where they want to go. So I think we'll see more of that, and I don't think that's going to go away, at least as for the foreseeable future.
Another question came in for Lanna from Florencia. Are you currently providing PPE to your passengers?
So that is actually something that is available. We are in the health agreement, we ask that you have a face covering and that you're wearing a mask, but push comes to shove, if you need something, we have there, it is supplyable. And then I was actually just thinking about too, with the health agreement, if you get to the airport and you are sick, which hopefully didn't happen, but we have temperature checks at some of the stations as well. And we've partnered with some, I think it's like Medvac, or I can't remember exactly what vendor it is, but to kind of let, if there's any uncertainty whatsoever, that we're checking and that guests have that assurance.
So a pretty big question came in here about having special spaces or procedures for first class patrons versus economy. Like, would they have different quarantine lounges? Would certain services be offered, like medical checks, to one class and not the other? And how to prevent sort of more stratification between the flight classes?
I don't know what your view is on this, Lana, but I could see if an airline adopted any of those kind of policies in this climate, I mean, it's commercial suicide, I would say.
That was my thoughts. I'm like, I don't think that that's a route that would bode well for any airline. And that's definitely not something that Alaska I would see doing, because it is like classist and elitist. That's probably not the right move to instill trust and to kind of uphold the reputation that we already have.
I mean, so a movement I've seen of probably over the last 5 years, and it's got a lot stronger, and I think it's stronger in America, is the progression away from the idea of classes. Like, you're not an economy class passenger, you're not a business class passenger or a first class passenger. You are someone who on a particular day is choosing a different service level. You might choose an economy service level one day. You might choose a business business service level another. So I think they're trying to get away from personifying the class and more talking about the standard of service. I think the more progress we can make in that, I think that is a good design challenge. Actually, is because you might travel economy class, but you might also want to treat your wife to or partner, whatever, to your honeymoon, and you want to go away and do something nice. You're executing that choice of moving between different levels of service, and I think that's a really, really critical thing to do, to make it okay that you've paid more money and you're going to get a better service. I think I think that's all right as long as it's positioned in the right way. Whether or not people deserve better quality medical attention or that, that's a whole another subject, isn't it? But I think, changing the idea of what the classes mean is a good idea. Further in that.
I didn't think through this, but maybe in the future we may see things like people who are at risk. So airlines could pay extra attention to them, or perhaps people who already went through COVID and they're immune could have another section of the aircraft. I don't know exactly how it will work, but I wonder if there will be a moment in time where we are saying you're COVID positive, you already passed through it, or how will that process be, right? We know so little about it that it's hard to predict how that will unfold.
So I think we have some agreement about what looks like classism, right, and what doesn't. And the second part of that big question was, as designers, do we play a part in determining what that experience is and calling out what shouldn't come to pass, and how do we do that?
I'm not sure if that lands on the designer. I mean, ultimately, the designer executes what that looks like, but I think the intention comes from the boardroom.
I'd say keeping to the, bringing in from the boardroom, like bringing your processes and your means of your design process to the boardroom or to the rest of it. And I think that will go a long way.
Another big question coming here. This is a little bit about how do we help users forget that they're working to keep themselves safe? How do we let them relinquish their stress about these environments like the airport and the plane?
I'm also curious here about, airports are tremendously high stress environments, and even the most vigilant sanitizers and distancers will forget when they're running to catch their flight. So I'm curious about if any of you have identified any sort of building systems or any sort of behind the scenes processes that can sort of compensate for perhaps the lack of attention that some people might pay when they're in a high stress environment like an airport.
Are we talking specifically about the spread of infectious diseases through airborne or surface?
Looks like yes.
So I think the role of airflow is starting to be understood quite well. Like if you look at some of the super spreading environments, they have been those that have a specific or maybe an accelerated lateral airflow. So one was a restaurant in Wuhan where I think 8 people got infected, and they were I think up to 13, 14 feet away from the infected patron, and they traced that back to being an air conditioning system that was on the wall that was blowing air sideways. So it was kind of circulating people's respiratory exhalations around the room. Another one was a bus in the Guangzhou district in China, where again, similar amount of people were infected from one person, and that was the windows of the bus are open. So there's a strong lateral airflow that was carrying that. So if you think, if lateral airflow can increase the range, then vertical airflow will inhibit that range. And I think what we're seeing now, I mean, ourselves included, we've done a ton of research on this now with computational fluid dynamics. We've had our engineering teams we really souped them up with some special computers and some new software so that we can calculate what's going on an aircraft and how we can inhibit the range of people's exhalations again and purge the cabin air quicker, because there's a lot of stagnant areas on an aircraft where, whilst the airflow is supposed to be being purged every 2 to 3 minutes, it's not every bit of air in there is. It's just the same volume is going in as going out. But there are areas that don't really move, and they tend to be around the passengers. And I think you're going to get that in a ton of different environments, like working environments, where I think the use of either air curtains between desks of people or air curtains between tables in restaurants, or a lot of accelerated top-down airflow where you just stopping that from moving around. I think that's a wise approach, because a lot of putting up barriers everywhere is very anti-human and quite anti-social and just clumsy and awkward, I think there are. But that said, I now think about going to a nightclub and being 3 rows deep away from the bar and waiting for my drink for half an hour, how much of other people's breath have I breathed in? You know, I never did that before, but now I do. And I think a lot of people will. I can see this becoming something now that's going to be a big focus in architecture, is how do we help with that? You know, and that is generally going to be a call to action, I think, for engineers and designers around the world, to make sure that all densely populated environments are as de-risked as they could be. It's one tool that I found interesting. I'm sure there are others.
I think I'll squeeze in this one last question before we call it. Circling back to the implications of designers and the responsibility for decisions like, you know, are the classes of flight more stratified or not with certain services? Question about the boardroom that is ultimately making the decisions. Are they human-centered?
I'd say generally, I think, boardroom generally, I'd say generally no. But I mean, I can't speak for all boardrooms. But I think that that's something that's new to many, and I feel like it's kind of the same thing where it's you're accustomed to doing things the way that you used to do them, and so kind of opening the eyes of everyone to, you know, maybe we can't do things the way that we used to always do them, or, you know, showing the value that you bring to using this approach. You know, things that, you know, bring us a problem and let the teams and let people solve for them, and kind of, I think that's the way that we've approached this, is like having some of that, like, it's a great idea, like, but don't tell us exactly what the solution is. Tell us, like, what are you trying to accomplish? What is this vision, and what do you want from that? And then we'll go from there. And it's not to say that, like, oh, give it to us and then you just stay, but it's keeping them informed and keeping them involved throughout the process, so that it's like bringing everyone together to do it to hopefully do it the right way.
Yeah, I think, Lana, you're spot on there, too, because I feel like as designers, it's our job also to educate them, right? So if there is a part where that boardroom happens to not be human-centered or fully human-centered, then it's our job to show them what can we achieve if we think that way, and hopefully the answer will be so powerful that they will see it by themselves, so we don't have to do more convincing. But yeah, I think educating is part of it. It's part of being a designer.
Right. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think you can tell when a boardroom is human-centered, because it's reflected in the service that the customer gets ultimately, the consistency of it and the way that it's messaged and executed, and how I think how the employees are as well. And you know, I think that feels like it's a mindset that is changing in America. Like the classic corporate culture, I think is being eroded by you know, a more progressive culture in certain companies, you know, and I see that the balance is going to shift completely at some point. We're only ever one generation away from a completely different situation, you know, depending on how you were educated and what you were influenced by, you know. But, sorry, got a bit philosophical there.
No, it's very cool. I love where we're going with this panel. So we did have another question come in about Sarah's a graduate student. It was looking for some resources. I think I'll hold that off as maybe you guys can send me some things if you think of them that can be posted with this recording on YouTube. That's kind of then accessible in posterity. Or perhaps she could reach out, LinkedIn, maybe to the IDSA board. We can connect people.
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, and then I'll go ahead and end my screen share here. And thank everyone for coming and for submitting so many questions. It was a really awesome panel. And thank you to our guests. Thank you, Lana, Anthony, and Jessica for answering all these questions, giving us a good big think. And stay tuned for the next IDSA Seattle events.
Thank you, Ginger.
For having me.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all. Amazing.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,
You know,
Jim.